Imagine a world where the simplest act of kindness blooms into something extraordinary. This is the story of Esther, a green-thumbed grandma whose life took an unexpected turn and changed everything for her and the whole community. Hey, Soul Stories fam. We've got a sweet and totally swoon-worthy love story for you today. Let's jump in. Detroit in winter. Rain poured down, the kind that seemed determined to drown the entire Motor City. Elena Carter huddled under a frayed canvas bag, sitting beneath a rattling metal awning that echoed with every drop. People said Detroit was a city of steel, of machines, of cars. To her tonight, it was only the city of colds. There was nothing of value in her worn bag. A few old certificates, a thick technical notebook, and a half-dead-eyed ballpoint pen. Elena clutched it like a treasure. In a way it was. There was nothing else left to hold. 1 year ago, I was calculating automatic braking systems for electric cars. 1 year later, I'm calculating whether instant noodles past expiration are safer than moldy bread. She muttered, half amused, half broken. At that moment, the side door of the building across from her swung open. A flood of white light spilled out. Above it, a huge sign flickered, 4 letters. Coal Motors. Elena let out a laugh, the kind that said, well, what else do I have left to lose? She had once worked for one of the company's smaller factories. Back then, getting into coal was a dream come true. Now, just standing outside staring at the logo made her feel even colder. The rain whipped harder. Elena decided to risk it. She slipped inside, searching for somewhere dry. The night guard was too glued to a basketball game on his phone to look up. The city is so kind, she thought. It's giving me free shelter from the rain. The steel door into the testing garage opened, and Elena felt like she had stepped into another world. Not the greasy, cluttered garage she was used to, but a colossal laboratory, high ceilings lined with bright LED lights, gleaming epoxy floors polished like mirrors, silver prototype cars lay under covers in perfect rows. Giant LED screens flashed system diagrams, and mechanical robots stood frozen, waiting for commands. Elena held her breath. It was breathtaking. But if anyone discovered her, a soaked homeless nobody wandering inside this billion-dollar garage, she'd be escorted straight back into the storm. Quietly, she crouched behind a rack of spare parts, hiding in the shadows. And then she heard it. We're about to lose everything. The male voice boomed loud enough to drown out the storm outside. Elena nearly dropped her bag. At the center of a circle of engineers stood Jonathan Cole, the young CEO of Coal Motors, grandson of the founder. He was tall, his tie thrown over a chair, shirt sleeves rolled up, hair a mess. The face that usually graced Forbes covers was twisted now with fury and despair. If this self-driving project fails, we lose the international contract. We lose the investors. We lose market trust. And Coal Motors will no longer be Coal Motors. Jonathan roared, his voice. The atmosphere in the garage was suffocating. Engineers exchanged glances but kept their heads down. One stammered, We've tried every algorithm, but the system keeps crashing." Another shook his head. "Not enough time, sir. Only 48 hours left." Elena propped her chin on her hand, sighed and whispered, "Looks just like a bunch of students at finals who forgot to study." Teacher yelling, students silent as clams. Jonathan slammed a pen onto the table with a dry crack. He turned storming out of the engineer circle and over to a corner of the garage. He braced himself on a metal table, head down, shoulders slumped. From where she sat, Elena could see every movement. She clicked her tongue softly. "A billionaire CEO looking exactly like me when I got kicked out of my boarding house for not paying rent. Only difference is I lost a rickety bed and this guy is about to lose an empire." Her eyes wandered to the massive LED display, a forest of arrows, boxes and crossed-out circles. In less than 10 seconds, she spotted the problem. The echo sensor duplicated signals during vibration, tricking the system into thinking the car's nose was tilting upward, which then ordered an correction downward. An elementary error buried under a maze of diagrams so convoluted no one could see it. Elena let out a soft laugh and muttered, "God, if I had turned in a diagram like this back in college, my professor would have sent me back to kindergarten." She tightened her grip on the bag pressed against her chest. Memories rushed back, sleepless nights over blueprints, heated fights with colleagues to defend her designs. The engineer's blood boiled in her, stronger than the cold outside. Her heart pounded. Elena lowered her head and whispered. Only she could hear it, but to her it thundered like an oath. "I can correct it." The words dissolved into the rain, but for Elena, they marked the turning point. The garage was heavy with silence after Jonathan's final outburst. The engineers whispered among themselves, but no one had a solution. A few were even packing up their laptops, exchanging furtive looks that clearly meant time to update the resume. From her hiding spot behind the parts rack, Elena bit her lip. She knew she couldn't stay silent forever. A part of her wanted to stand up and scream, "You idiots!" But another voice inside reminded her, "Wake up, you're just a homeless woman in a torn coat reeking of rain. Who's going to believe you?" Then Jonathan slammed the steel table again. The sharp sound reverberated through the garage. His hoarse voice followed. "If we can't fix this, then it's over." His face was twisted in despair. so raw it made Elena's chest tighten. He wasn't a billionaire CEO anymore. Not in that moment. Just a man losing the fight, crushed by theories and pressure. Elena drew in a deep breath. Well then, one gamble. At worst, I'll be thrown back on the street. And the street, I know it well enough. She rose to her feet, tugged at her frayed coat shoulders, and walked toward the meeting room at the edge of the garage. Knock, knock, knock. The sound echoed, startling the entire room into looking up. The door swung open. Elena stepped inside. What a sight she must have been. Gray coat ripped at the hem, hair plastered wet from rain, shoes swishing water with every step. If someone had said the janitor had wandered in by mistake, everyone would have believed it. Sorry. Elena forced a smile, her voice raspy. I couldn't help overhearing. Sounds like you've got a problem with your autonomous steering sensors. The room erupted in laughter. An engineer with slick-back hair and glasses sneered. Well, look at that. We found ourselves a new expert. A homeless woman? Another chimed in, mocking. Or maybe she misheard self-driving as self-aing. The laughter grew, echoing like jeers. A few even raised their phones, secretly recording the scene for entertainment. The night guard rushed forward, grabbing Elena's arm. You're not allowed in here, outside. Now, before I call the police. Elena squirmed, trying to keep her smile even as her heart pounded. Hey, relax. I'm not stealing, not breaking anything. I just spotted an error. That's all. Out, the guard barked. He yanked her toward the door. At that very moment, Jonathan lifted his head. He had heard everything. Wait. His voice was low, hoarse but carried absolute authority. The room froze. Jonathan stepped closer. His eyes scanned Elena from head to toe. Her shabby clothes, her rain-soaked hair, but her eyes still burned bright. He had probably never seen anyone look so out of place in his billion-dollar garage. You said you saw the error? Jonathan asked, every word deliberate. Elena swallowed hard. Yes, I think there's a feedback loop in the echo sensor. It makes the self-driving system misinterpret. More laughter cut her off. Oh God, hear that? She even knows the word echo, probably read it in an old newspaper somewhere. Jonathan raised his hand. Silence fell instantly. His gaze stayed locked on Elena. Let her try. Mr. Cole, you can't be serious, one of the lead engineers protested. This is classified information, an outsider. I said, let her try. Jonathan's voice sliced through, cold and final. No one dared argue again. The guard released her arm. Elena stood frozen, hands trembling. Great. I was just trying to sound clever, and now he actually agreed. Jonathan handed her a marker and pulled a whiteboard closer. Right. Elena took the marker. Her fingers shook, but in her mind, everything was crystal clear. She erased a few messy loops and redrew a simple diagram. 3 main sensors, a single connection line, and a red slash exactly where the feedback occurred. She inhaled deeply, then spoke, her tone steady, laced with a touch of sarcasm to keep her nerves in check. Here, this is the issue. You're letting the echo sensor send duplicate signals. The car thinks its nose is tipping up, then dives down. Basically, it thinks it's a penguin learning to fly. The room went silent. The engineers crowded closer to look. One frowned. There really is a loop here. Another muttered. How did we miss this? Elena smirked faintly. Because you turned it into a labyrinth when really it's just like fixing a jammed door latch. Jonathan studied the board, then turned to her. For the first time that night, his eyes lit with a spark of hope. What's your name? Elena blinked. Carter. Elena Carter. Former engineer. Current official occupation. Rain-dodging expert under awnings. A beat of silence. And then, unexpectedly, Jonathan chuckled softly. The sound was brief but real. All right. Carter, tonight, you're invisible no more. Elena exhaled, relief washing over her. Inwardly, she thought, well, at least I've reclaimed a little piece of light. Even if I'm still wearing a torn coat. The air in the garage at night felt as thick as engine oil clinging to the steel walls. The makeshift war room was now packed. Senior engineers, night shift guards, even a few office staff who had stayed behind out of sheer curiosity. Every eye was fixed on the central simulation screen where Cole Motors' virtual car was about to make its first test run after Elena's revised diagram. Jonathan stood at the front, arms folded tightly across his chest, fingers digging into his own arm until they turned white. He looked like a general about to march into his last battle. Except his army was made up of laptops and cables. Elena kept to the back corner. Her soaked coat was draped over a chair, revealing a faded t-shirt with the words, NASA, need another 7 attempts. She smirked to herself. Yeah, that fits me. Always failing 7 times before pulling off one success. A young engineer's hand shook as he pressed enter. The screen flashed. The virtual car appeared, sleek, gleaming, running in self-driving mode on a simulated highway. Its wheels turned smoothly, sensor data sprawling across the dashboard. Everyone held their breath. The only sound was the faint hum of processors working overtime. 10 seconds, 20, 40. The car still glided steadily. No more nosediving. No more jerking up like a penguin trying to learn how to fly. Someone gasped. No way. It's actually holding. Another whispered quickly. Wait. Last time it ran fine for 20 seconds, too, then. But this time, There were no sudden jolts, no flashing red alerts, just a straight road, a steady car, signal so stable it was almost boring. 1 minute to 5 the war room was dead silent except for the pounding of hearts. Jonathan stepped closer to the screen as if his eyes couldn't believe what they were seeing. He double-checked the data then checked again. The sensor signals were perfectly stable. No loops, no glitches. An older engineer hissed under his breath. That damn feedback loop. We spent 3 months and never caught it. She found it in 3 minutes. Slowly, every gaze in the room shifted toward Elena. She stood with her hands stuffed in her pockets, trying to look casual, though her heart was racing, feeling the weight of their stares. She shrugged. What? You're looking at me like I just hacked NASA. I only corrected what was right in the first place. You buried it under so much clutter that the system went nuts. Silence. Jonathan turned back, his eyes carrying something rare, deep gratitude. His voice was trembling slightly but firm. You just saved my company. The words hit like a hammer. Some engineers gaped, others stared down at the table, ashamed of having mocked her moments ago. Elena smiled faintly, but it was a smile with more sadness than joy. Mr. Cole, don't put me on a pedestal. I didn't invent anything. I just stripped away the knots you tied yourselves into. She paused, drew in a breath, then added, sometimes the grandest things collapse simply because people forget the simplicity at the start. Jonathan froze. For a man who had lived years drowning in ambition and pressure, her words felt like a slap of truth. He stepped closer, lowered his voice. Miss Carter, how do you know this so well? Elena chuckled, this time more quiet and sad. Used to be an engineer, now unemployed engineer, part-time dumpster diver in Detroit. A murmur rippled through the room. A young female engineer looked at her with sympathy while the slick-haired man who mocked her earlier flushed red. Jonathan seemed to want to ask more, but stopped himself. On the screen, the virtual car continued to roll, smooth, as if the flaw had never existed. A miracle unfolding right before everyone's eyes. 5 minutes, 10, 15. No errors, no alarms. The engineers began to clap hesitantly at first, then louder until the garage thundered with applause echoing off the steel roof. For the first time in months, Cole Motors smelled like hope. Elena shifted awkwardly, shoulders raised. Come on, don't clap like I just discovered a new planet. I just deleted one loop. Anyone could have done it, a voice rang out. None of us saw it. Only you did. Elena flushed quickly, deflecting with a joke. Maybe because I've been unemployed so long. I had too much free time to stare at diagrams. The room burst into laughter. Relieved, lighter, the tension finally broken. Jonathan didn't laugh. He stared at the screen. Then at Elena. In his eyes, for the first time in years, was something new, recognition, hope, and a hint of curiosity. Quietly, just for her, he said, you didn't just fix a loop. You just reset the life cycle of Cole Motors. Elena blinked. Her heart skipped a beat, but unwilling to sink into such heavy sentiment, she quipped, sounds awfully philosophical, but hey, if your company really bounces back, at least buy me a burger. I'm starving. Jonathan hesitated, then surprisingly laughed, a genuine laugh, rare and unguarded, washing away the cold reputation that clung to his name in the business world. Burger, absolutely. On the screen, the car rolled on. Outside, Detroit rain kept falling, but inside the garage it felt like dawn breaking. A voice whispered, tonight. An invisible person stepped into the light. Elena heard it, but only smiled. She knew she was still just a drifter, but at least in this moment she had proven her worth still existed. And so that night, Cole Motors was saved by a ragged girl, empty-handed but brilliant, a miracle drawn from a single circle and one red slash. Warm golden light poured over the EO's office on the top floor of Cole Motors headquarters. Compared to the noisy oil-stained garage below, this place was unnervingly quiet. On the walnut desk lay thick stacks of contracts and rows of luxury car models, all reflecting the cold authority of an empire built on technology. Jonathan Cole sat across from Elena. His expression was no longer as rigid as before, but his eyes were sharp, as if trying to peel away every hidden layer of her. In front of him, Elena sat with her arms folded, her ragged clothes and rain-damp brown hair, making her look like a misplaced puzzle piece in this world of polished wealth. Jonathan leaned forward, resting an elbow on the desk, his voice low but piercing. Who are you? Elena laughed, a sound that was part bitter, part mocking, covering the unease underneath. Oh, the classic question. Normally, people ask for a name first, then who are you? But fine, I'll just assume you've been watching an action movie and you're still in character. Jonathan didn't smile. He simply kept staring, patient, waiting, till Elena leaned back in her chair, eyes tracing the ceiling as though replaying an old film reel. I once had everything, a job most people would kill for, a cozy little home, and a husband I thought was my partner for life. Turns out he had more partners than I realized. Jonathan's brow furrowed. Elena gave a flat smile. Yeah, an affair, but that wasn't the real knife in the back. The real one came when he embezzled research funds and blamed me for it. Overnight, I went from lead engineer to scapegoat. The company threw me out. Colleagues turned their backs and he ran off with his shiny new lover. She inhaled, her tone calm, but her eyes blazing. So I lost my job, my home and my faith. All I walked away with was this bag. Elena set the worn canvas bag on the table and unzipped it. Inside lay a thick technical notebook, a handful of crumpled certificates, and a stubby pencil. See, this is all that's left after marriage and career. Some scraps of paper, souvenirs from a whole life. She laughed again, bitter, but forcing a bit of humor into it. As for the ex, last I heard he's busy researching a different kind of vehicle. Fewer with 4 wheels, a lot more with 2 legs and high heels. Jonathan's gaze lingered on the notebook. He looked at it as though it contained a buried fragment of her soul. Elena shrugged, trying to break the heavy mood with another jab. So now you understand why a broke nobody like me could walk into a war room and poke holes in the diagrams of your 1,000-an-hour engineers. Because I've been there. In fact, I was once above them. Jonathan stayed silent for a long moment. The wind outside rustled the curtains. The overhead light swayed slightly, casting his strong features into sharper relief. At last, he spoke. Miss Carter, if what you're telling me is true, then tonight you didn't just save Coal Motors, you proved you're still one of the sharpest engineering minds this industry has ever had. Elena let out a laugh, this one dripping with self-mockery. Sharpest? A brilliant engineer who sleeps under bridges and trades empty bottles for fast food. Mr. Cole, you make it sound like you're writing a recruiting ad. Jonathan pressed his lips together. He wasn't used to being cut off and even less to being mocked. But from Elena, the sarcasm didn't irritate him. Instead, it made her feel too real to dismiss. He tapped his fingers lightly on the desk, eyes locked on hers. So what do you want now? Elena blinked, surprised. She tilted her head, arching a brow. What do I want? I want a double cheeseburger. I want a pair of shoes without holes in the soles. And if I dare to dream big, a mattress with actual springs so my back doesn't crack every morning. Jonathan chuckled. For the second time that night, the infamously cold CEO actually laughed. Elena propped her chin on her hand, continuing with a half-joke, half-truth. As for work, I'm not expecting much. People like me, branded as career ruined. The industry has no place for us. Scandal sticks faster than accomplishments ever do. Jonathan stayed silent, but in his eyes one thing was certain. Elena Carter was no longer invisible. The office light glowed over the old technical notebook, illuminating the faded but meticulous notes. Elena brushed her fingers over the page as though stroking a piece of the life she had lost. Jonathan rose and walked to the window, gazing down at the city's lights in Detroit. He didn't turn back, but his voice filled the room. Some things get buried, but they never disappear. Elena blinked. For a fleeting moment, she saw her reflection in the glass. Not a ragged wanderer, but an engineer, a person of true worth. The next morning, as the first rays of sunlight touched the Coal Motors campus, rumors spread faster than the morning news. The CEO brought a homeless woman in as an advisor. In the company cafeteria, engineers buzzed like a hive. Some gawked in disbelief. Others snickered. A few even started an office betting pool. How long would she last? A week, 3 days, or just until lunch? Elena had been given a small room in the dormitory for young employees. When she opened the door, she froze. The room had only a single bed, a tiny closet, and an old wooden desk. To anyone else, it was nothing special. But to someone who had been living under a bridge, it felt like a 5-star hotel. She petted the mattress, eyes welling up. Oh God, it's soft. Tonight, I don't have to fight stray cats for space. Then she flopped down, rolling left and right, laughing like a child who just discovered a new toy. Meanwhile, in the meeting room, Jonathan stood beside the electronic board, declaring with crisp authority, starting today, Elena Carter will join as an advisor on Project Athena. The room went silent for 1 second, then exploded into whispers. Advisor? That homeless woman from last night? You've got to be kidding. Boss, beggar engineer. A buzzed engineer cleared his throat. With all due respect, Mr. Cole, we've studied for decades, worked night and day, and now a homeless person suddenly becomes an advisor. This isn't right. Standing in the corner, Elena kept her hands tucked into the pockets of her faded coat. Hearing every word, she smirked faintly, muttering just to herself, beggar engineer. Has a nice ring to it. Maybe I should print it on a business card. Might even trend. Jonathan's reply was cold and firm. I don't need a team full of degrees. I need results. And Carter has already given me results. The words silenced many, but doubt still hovered like a storm cloud. That afternoon, the engineers gathered again. On the screen, the autonomous sensor diagram still flashed in glaring red. Warning signs of failure. One engineer sighed. This can be fixed, but it'll reduce efficiency. Elena sat at the end of the table, eyes sparkling. She rested her chin on her hand, murmuring, if you can't eliminate the flaw, turn it into a feature. Everyone snapped their heads toward her. What did you just say? Elena shrugged, grabbed a marker and hurried to the board. She scribbled a few quick lines, explaining at rapid-fire speed. Look, the sensor skews a few percent, right? Instead of forcing perfect accuracy, we use that deviation to predict dangerous scenarios before they happen. In other words, turn error into an early warning. The room's atmosphere shifted instantly. Some engineers exchanged glances, nodding slowly. One of the guys who had mocked her earlier muttered, "Hey, that actually sounds reasonable." Jonathan folded his arms, his eyes lighting up. He gestured for an assistant to run the simulation immediately. On the screen, the virtual car sped forward. When it hit a slick stretch of road, the early warning system triggered thanks to that very flaw, allowing the car to adjust in time. The room erupted in astonishment. Elena grinned mischievously. "See, sometimes life is like a sensor, a little off balance. But if you use it right, you'll avoid a crash." The meeting ended in unusual quiet. There were no more loud jeers. Instead, plenty of sidelong glances followed Elena. In one corner, an engineer whispered to a colleague, "Maybe this beggar engineer isn't a joke after all." Another scratched his head. "Yeah, that idea was actually pretty damn clever." From a distance, Jonathan watched the corner of his mouth curving slightly. He knew trust wouldn't come in a single day, but Elena had laid the first brick. That night, back in her dorm room, Elena collapsed onto the bed. The warm light shone down over her messy hair. She pulled the old technical notebook from her canvas bag and opened to a blank page. For the first time in years, she began to write again. Scrawled words appeared. Day 1 back in the world of engineers. Still alive, still holding onto a little faith. She set the pencil down and chuckled softly. From homeless to advisor, guess Detroit never gets boring. Then she pulled the blanket up and for the first time in years drifted into sleep in a room without leaky roofs or scurrying rats. 48 hours to destiny. 2 days later, the atmosphere at Cole Motors was tight as a bowring. Jonathan had to present before the board of international investors over video conference power players from Germany, Japan, and beyond. Men who controlled hundreds of millions of dollars and could decide the company's fate with just a few clicks. Elena stood in the back row unannounced, but Jonathan still glanced over his shoulder, giving her a subtle nod, an unspoken recognition. On the screen, the simulation began. The virtual car sped across rough terrain. Sensor signals remained steady, and the self-driving system no longer spiraled into chaos. A German investor frowned and asked, "Are you certain the issue has been completely resolved?" Jonathan answered plainly, "We've eliminated the critical error. There are still small details to optimize, but the foundation of the technology is solid." The entire room held its breath. Silence lingered. Then a Japanese investor spoke. "In that case, we agree to proceed with the next rounds of evaluation." The word struck like a lightning bolt, shattering the gloom. Several other investors nodded in agreement. Jonathan exhaled, clenching his fist in quiet triumph. He turned toward Elena. She said nothing, just winked and flashed a thumbs up. "Good job." That evening, when the meeting was over, Jonathan stood in his office, looking down at the workshop below. Among the neatly dressed engineers in crisp shirts, Elena stood out. Faded second-hand coat, hair tied up but still messy, hunched over a circuit board. Scribbling notes on scrap paper, she muttered to herself as she worked. "If we add a heat sensor here, the system won't be so stubborn. Just like my ex-boyfriend always broke down the moment things got heated." A nearby engineer nearly spat out his drink while Jonathan burst into laughter in his office. He had never heard anyone compare circuitry to men so naturally. That day, Jonathan made a decision. He walked down to the shop floor. Just as Elena was gathering her papers, he asked, "Carter, are you free tonight?" Elena looked up, frowning. Probably. My schedule's packed these days." Instant noodles staring at the dorm ceiling. "But fine, I'll cancel." Jonathan laughed. He wasn't used to this brand of self-deprecating humor, but he found it oddly refreshing. "Have dinner with me." Around them, engineers froze. Eyes widened at the sight of the CEO inviting a homeless advisor to dinner as though she were a major partner. Elena shrugged, half curious, half wary. "Sounds a little like a date, doesn't it? Aren't you afraid your shareholders will get jealous?" Jonathan replied smoothly. "I can handle my shareholders, but if you refuse, I'll assume you're turning down a dinner sponsored by Cole Motors." Elena laughed. "Fine, but fair warning, my tastes are a little unconventional." Jonathan took her to an upscale restaurant in downtown Detroit, but as the waiter opened the door, Elena stopped. She pointed across the street at a hot dog cart. "Nope, I want that." Jonathan blinked. "You're joking." "Nope, I'm actually addicted to hot dogs. Besides, if we eat here, I'll have to sit up straight and use knives and forks like it's graduation day. Exhausting. With hot dogs, you just take a bite and keep walking." Before he could react, Elena was already tugging him across the street. The vendor hurriedly wrapped 2 steaming hot dogs. Elena grabbed them and handed one to Jonathan. He looked at the greasy paper, then at his 1,000 suit, and burst out laughing. "This is the first time a $5 dinner tastes better than a $500 steak." Elena mid-bite nearly choked from laughing. "Don't you dare laugh at me. I once tried a $500 steak. Ended up washing dishes for a month to pay for it." Jonathan shook his head, chuckling as he studied her. He had never eaten hot dogs on the street with anyone. "I never thought a CEO like him would feel this comfortable." After dinner, they strolled along the riverside park. Detroit at night was cool. The lights glittering across the water. Elena perched on a bench, head tilted back, still holding half a hot dog. You know, it's been a long time since I felt like a real person. Not a beggar engineer, not some shadow living on pity, just a woman eating a hot dog with a man. Jonathan was silent for a moment. Her words were simple, yet they struck straight into his chest. He glanced over. Her eyes no longer carried the heaviness he'd seen before. There was a spark of mischief, even confidence. Carter, you're unlike anyone I've ever met. Different because I haven't washed my hair in 3 days. Jonathan laughed and shook his head. Number different because you dare to live honestly? Elena shrugged, finishing the last bite. Pretending is exhausting. Trust me, I've tried. In that moment, the line between the cold CEO and the homeless woman blurred. They were simply two people sharing an odd dinner and a rare sense of peace. Later that night, as Jonathan walked her back to the dorms, he paused at her door. He glanced at the plain wooden frame, the warm light spilling from inside. Strangely, it felt cozier than his own sterile penthouse. Elena turned, waving playfully. Thanks for the 5-star hot dog dinner, Mr. Cole. See you in the garage tomorrow. Jonathan laughed. When she closed the door, he lingered a few seconds longer, realizing something unexpected. He had begun to admire her, still following the story. If this story found you outside of Soul Stories, we invite you home to where every touching tale begins with truth, hope, and heart. Marcus Green sat in his private office, bloodshot eyes glued to his laptop screen. Every time a slide popped up with the title Elena Carter, project advisor, his blood boiled. That name cut into his pride like a knife. He was a veteran engineer with more than a decade of experience, once proudly considered the brain of Cole Motors. And now, in just a few days, a homeless woman with a ragged canvas bag had stolen the spotlight. Younger engineers whispered in admiration, and Jonathan Cole, the very CEO whose handshake Marcus had dreamed of, was now listening to Elena more than to him. Marcus grounded his teeth. A beggar dares to set foot here. He launched his smear campaign. First came the whispers inside the company. You really think a homeless woman fixed autonomous driving tech? She must be posing as an engineer. Playing on the boss's pity, the rumor spread like a virus. Some junior staff, unsure what to believe, gossiped nervously around the coffee machine. But Marcus wasn't done. He had an old friend who worked for a tabloid site that thrived on clickbait headlines. All Marcus needed were a few photos of Elena in her shabby clothes entering the employee dorms, plus a so-called internal source, Marcus himself, and the bombshell article was born. CEO of Cole Motors infatuated with homeless woman, the mystery behind the billion-dollar project advisor. By the next morning, the headline had gone viral. Car groups, tech forums, and even gossip boards were ablaze with speculation and ridicule. When Jonathan entered the boardroom the following morning, he carried a copy of the paper, ink still fresh. His temple twitched with anger. The pure team was in chaos, scrambling for damage control. This is fabricated, the communications manager fumed. But the public loves drama more than truth. Jonathan tapped his fingers on the table, his voice cold as steel. Who spread this? No one answered, but Elena caught Marcus' sideways glance. His eyes gleamed with smug satisfaction, as if saying, see, this is what real power looks like. Contrary to what many expected, Elena didn't rage or cry. She glanced at the headline and chuckled. Infatuated with a homeless woman. That almost sounds romantic. If Hollywood makes a movie out of this, I want Emma Stone to play me. The room fell silent. The beer manager blinked. You can joke at a time like this. If I don't joke, what else am I supposed to do? Elena shrugged. Honestly, what scares me more isn't the tabloids. It's the dumpster outside the dorm being overturned this morning. Trust me, the rats are the real enemy here. Jonathan's lips curved despite himself. In the middle of a pure storm, Elena's humor worked like a bomb. But he knew this wasn't trivial. The international investors were watching closely. If the rumors weren't contained, Cole Motors' reputation could collapse before the project even launched. He thought grimly, I have to protect her. Jonathan ended the meeting with a firm voice. Rumors will fade. Technology will speak. In the next 72 hours, we'll release the first demo. If the car runs flawlessly, no one will care who Elena Carter is. His eyes flicked to her, steady and resolute. Elena met his gaze, warmth blooming inside her. This cold, powerful CEO was now standing in front of the storm for someone invisible like her. Meanwhile, down the hall, Marcus clenched his phone. The first article was only the beginning. He had prepared even more fake evidence to bury Elena for good. He muttered darkly, just wait, you so-called beggar engineer. Tension before the test. That morning, the Detroit sky was gray and heavy, as if determined to push Cole Motors' nerves to the breaking point. On the vast test track, a crowd of reporters, international investors, and engineers pressed against the barriers, all waiting for the moment that would decide the company's fate. Jonathan strode forward in a black suit and tightly knotted tie, his face carved in stone. He couldn't afford to show a single crack. Though inside he was strung as tight as wire. If the prototype failed today, the project wouldn't just collapse. The reputation of Cole Motors would be buried under the tabloid headlines of the past week. Elena, by contrast, looked far less imposing. She appeared in a borrowed dormitory coat, her hair tied back half-hazardly with a rubber band. When she saw the cameras swivel in her direction, she whispered, "God, I hope they don't catch me shaking like a puppy in a thunderstorm." Jonathan tilted his head toward her. "If you're nervous, just stand behind me." Elena grinned. "Great idea, but you're so tall. If I stand behind you, I'll vanish completely from reality." He didn't reply, but the corner of his mouth twitched, the rare urge to laugh on the brink of battle. Then Marcus Green arrived, polished and smug, clutching a thick binder. His voice dripped with mockery. "I'm genuinely curious. Will Carter's 5-minute hallway fix keep a car from slamming into a wall?" Elena raised her chin, eyes narrowing. "If you're worried about the car hitting a wall, maybe you should stand farther back. Safer for both sides." A few nearby reporters overheard and snickered. Marcus flushed red and turned away sharply. The gleaming silver prototype rolled onto the track. The sensors were calibrated according to Elena's revised diagram. The crowd fell silent as Jonathan gave the signal to the remote operator. On the giant display beside the track, live sensor data streamed across the screen, waves bouncing like heartbeats. The car accelerated, veered left, then veered right before entering a sharp curve. No stutters, no lurches. The movement was smooth enough to draw murmurs of surprise in French, German and Mandarin among the investors. Elena clasped her hands behind her back, murmuring under her breath as if coaxing a pet, "Easy there, silver baby, nice and smooth. Don't embarrass me in front of the world." Jonathan shot her a sidelong glance. "Did you just call the billion-dollar prototype silver baby? It sparkles like a shiny new coin." Elena winked. "I was going to call it silver potato, but I figured the press wouldn't appreciate it." Jonathan almost laughed out loud, but swallowed it down. Just as the crowd began to relax, the display suddenly flashed red. "Warning, sensor number 4 unstable." Gasps rippled through the onlookers. Marcus pounced immediately. "I knew it. The system isn't stable. This is what happens when you trust a vagrant." Elena's brows knit as her eyes locked onto the screen. In less than 5 seconds, she blurted, "That sensor isn't broken. It's just misaligned." She turned to Jonathan, her voice sharp with certainty. "Give me 2 minutes." Jonathan nodded without hesitation. To the astonishment of the reporters, Elena sprinted onto the test track. She popped open the front hood and adjusted the sensor with an old wrench she always kept in her canvas bag, her only lucky charm from her engineering days. One quick twist. She slammed the hood shut, waved her hand. "Done. Let's roll." The car resumed. The display returned to green, the graph steady like a healthy heartbeat. The crowd erupted into applause. When the car finally stopped cleanly at the finish line, Jonathan inhaled deeply as though he just pulled back from the edge of a cliff. He stepped onto the platform and spoke briefly. "Cole Motors is ready to enter a new era." Cameras flashed, microphones swarmed. A Japanese investor stood and declared, "I would like to meet Advisor Carter personally. She has a truly unique perspective." Elena's eyes went wide. "Meet me. I didn't even brush my hair this morning." The crowd laughed. No one was thinking about the homeless woman anymore. Instead, they were marveling at the advisor who had just saved the project in front of the entire world. When the test concluded, Jonathan pulled Elena away from the swarm of reporters. His gaze burned with a mix of respect and gratitude. "You just saved Cole Motors for the second time." Elena waved a hand dismissively. "No, I just tightened a screw. That's survival skill 101 for people who dig through dumpsters for soda cans." Jonathan laughed, this time unable to hold it back. And on that gloomy rain-washed morning in Detroit, the rare smile of Cole Motors' cold CEO shone because of a woman who had once been invisible. After the success of the 72 Hour demo, Elena Carter's name was everywhere. From the homeless woman mocked on headlines, she had now become the mysterious hero who saved Cole Motors. For Marcus Green, it was maddening. In his private office, he slammed a report down so hard that coffee splattered across the desk. A woman off the streets being called an advisor. "I've bled for this company my entire career. And now a beggar engineer steals all the glory." His fist clenched, eyes flashing with venom. "Fine, Elena Carter. If you want to play in the world of power, then prepare to be crushed." Marcus set his plan in motion. He bribed a low-level technician to slip faulty code into the simulation system. If it were discovered, the blame would fall squarely on Elena's design. At the same time, he anonymously sent a packet of forged documents to a tabloid, claiming Elena had once been fired from her previous company for technical fraud. The evidence was fabricated, but with fake signatures that looked convincingly real. One morning, Elena was hunched over her notebook in the dorm, scribbling. When a frantic knock rattled her door, she opened it to find a young colleague. Pale with worry, "Ms. Carter, the news. They're saying you were fired for falsifying data." Elena froze, snatching his phone. She opened the article. In bold headlines, it screamed scandal. Cole Motors' new advisor hid past firing for fraud. Below was a photo of her in ragged clothes on her very first day at the garage. Elena bit her lip, muttering under her breath, "Well, at least they picked one where I'm not picking my nose." Her colleagues stared, stunned that she could still joke at a time like this. That afternoon, she was summoned to the EO's office. Jonathan stood by the window, hands in his pockets, voice firm. I want to hear it directly from you. What the press wrote, is it true? Elena met his gaze without flinching. I left my old company because my ex-husband embezzled project funds and framed me. I lost my job, my reputation, and my home, but fraud? Never, not then, not ever. Jonathan studied her in silence. Years of billion-dollar negotiations had trained him to read body language. And Elena's eyes were clear, unwavering. Finally, he nodded. I believe you. But Marcus and some of the shareholders won't be so easy. The next day in the main boardroom, Marcus presented his so-called evidence. On the screen, forged documents appeared, stamped with Elena Carter's signature. Ladies and gentlemen, Marcus declared, this is why we cannot trust a vagrant. She committed fraud before, and now she manipulates the EO's pity to worm her way into Cole Motors. The engineers murmured, some shook their heads in doubt, others eyed Elena with suspicion. Elena crossed her arms, one brow arched. Mr. Green, where exactly did you get a copy of my signature without the green nail polish back then? I was addicted to green nail polish. Every signature I made was smeared with it. The room burst into laughter. Jonathan smirked. Marcus turned red, stammering. That's just low-quality scan work. Elena shrugged. About as low quality as your ethics. The room roared with laughter. For a moment, the tension dissolved. But Marcus wasn't finished. He fired up the simulation where the planted error immediately triggered system-critical error. The crowd gasped. Marcus lifted his chin toward Elena. See, your so-called improvements just broke the system. Jonathan's fists clenched. Elena, however, calmly stepped closer to the display. Eyes narrowing. Within seconds she chuckled. Oh, come on. This error is dumber than the time I tried to hack Starbucks Wi-Fi. The room fell silent. Elena tapped a few quick commands on the keyboard. The log file appeared on the big screen. Error injected by user Marcus G. The room exploded. A young engineer shouted, holy crap. The error was tagged with his username. All eyes whipped toward Marcus. His face went pale, sweat beading on his forehead. Elena crossed her arms, half smiling, half serious. Next time, Mr. Green, at least use a guest account. Jonathan rose, voice cutting through the chaos. Marcus Green, you are hereby suspended. Cole Motors has no place for those who sabotage their colleagues. Marcus shouted, desperate, you'll regret this. But 2 security guards were already escorting him out. The boardroom erupted. Engineers who had doubted Elena now stepped forward, shaking her hand. Sorry, Miss Carter. We put our trust in the wrong person. Elena just shrugged, grinning wryly. No worries. I'm used to it. People used to think I cheated at panhandling, too. The room burst into laughter once again. As the crowd dispersed, Jonathan approached her quietly. I owe you a thank you. You didn't just save the project. You saved my honor. Elena's eyes sparkled, though her tone stayed teasing. In that case, you can buy me a hot dog tonight. Nothing under $5, though. I've gotten used to high-class dining. Jonathan laughed for the second time that day, and this time, the smile was just for her. That morning, Cole Motors headquarters gleamed as if the whole city had turned its gaze toward it. On the red carpet leading into the grand hall, reporters swarmed. Cameras flashing non-stop. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. What could CEO Jonathan Cole be announcing that calls for the entire international press? Jonathan emerged clad in his impeccable navy suit, but his eyes burned with a sharper resolve than usual. He stepped onto the podium. Behind him, the massive LED screen lit up with the words, Innovation is Human, Cole Motors 2030. After a few opening remarks, Jonathan's tone shifted. Today, I want to introduce to the world the person who not only saved this company, but perhaps even the American auto industry. The press erupted. Jonathan turned as the side door opened. A slender woman in a simple black blazer walked onto the stage. She wasn't a polished peer model nor a flashy tech star. It was Elena Carter, the woman once branded a beggar engineer. Flashes burst like lightning. One reporter couldn't help shouting, my God, isn't that the homeless woman photographed in the garage? Jonathan smiled, placed a firm hand on Elena's shoulder, and said with absolute clarity, allow me to introduce Cole Motors' new head of safety engineering, Elena Carter. The hall exploded in gasps. Cameras zoomed in, capturing every flicker of Elena's expression. She had prepared herself, but when truly faced with hundreds of lenses, her throat tightened. Never in her life had she imagined being introduced with honor instead of scorn. Minutes later, headlines began flooding the internet. Homeless woman saved America's auto industry. From streets to spotlight, Elena Carter becomes head of safety at Cole Motors. Miracle engineer, how a forgotten woman outshone the experts. Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn all ablaze. Some were skeptical, but most were thrilled, inspired. A single image, Elena's shy but determined gaze beside the powerful Jonathan, became a viral symbol. Stepping to the podium, Elena felt the blinding stage lights on her still disheveled face. She gripped the microphone, her hands trembling slightly, then broke into a smile. I bet you're all wondering, what could a homeless woman possibly know about cars? Laughter rippled through the hall, but no one looked away. Her voice steadied as she went on. Just months ago I was sleeping on a park bench. I was chewing on a stale piece of bread thinking that's it. This is where my life ends. I once had a career, a home, and I lost everything to mistakes that weren't even mine. People called me a failure. Some said to my face, "You're nothing." She paused, scanning the hall, her eyes bright with anticipation. But that night, under the rain, I happened to glimpse a technical diagram, and the engineer inside me woke up. In that moment, I wasn't unemployed. I wasn't a beggar. I was just Elena, a woman who loved her work, who loved numbers and diagrams so much that even on an empty stomach, I still wanted to set them right. The murmurs died completely. Every year was tuned to her. I realized something. You can lose money, lose your home, even lose your reputation. But if you hold on to knowledge and faith, you haven't truly lost everything. I once thought I was only a shadow, but today, because of the chance I was given, I'm standing here. Elena smiled wider now, her voice ringing strong and clear. The world may look at you and say, "Impossible," but if you believe in yourself, whisper back, "I can correct it." I whispered those words once in a dark garage, and it changed my entire life. The hall erupted into thunderous applause. Reporters wiped tears from their eyes. Jonathan stood beside her, his gaze blazing with pride. When the conference ended, dozens of reporters continued to pursue her. But backstage, Elena's heart was pounding. Jonathan approached, leaning close to murmur, "You did better than I ever imagined." Elena laughed, her eyes glistening. "You thought I'd choke and call myself homeless chief engineer, didn't you?" Jonathan chuckled, truly relaxed for the first time in weeks. By that afternoon, her story had spread worldwide. Major outlets declared, "Elena Carter proves that technology isn't about degrees or glamour but intelligence and grit." Universities sent her invitations to speak to students. An international women's organization nominated her for Inspirational Woman of the Year. Most importantly, investor confidence in Coal Motors surged. Stock tickers glowed green, lifting the company out of months of crisis. Late that night, back in her dorm, Elena stood before the mirror. The woman staring back still wore the old blazer, her hair still unruly, but her eyes no longer carried shame. She brushed her fingers against the canvas bag hanging nearby and whispered softly, "At last, I can hold my head high." Outside, the city lights blazed like the very future opening before her. Both of them attended the conference in Chicago. That evening, Chicago was draped in shimmering lights like a golden ribbon. Jonathan had reserved a table at a luxurious restaurant on the top floor of Morgan's Tower Hotel, a place where the world's top business figures often dined. Elena felt uneasy as she walked in. The simple dress Jonathan's assistant had prepared for her made her feel both insecure and surprised. She had once been an engineer, once attended international conferences, but years of drifting on the streets had made crystal chandeliers and the soft notes of violins feel foreign. "I don't belong here," she whispered. Jonathan smiled, pulling out a chair for her. "You belong here more than anyone. Trust me." They sat facing each other. Red wine swirled in the glasses, candlelight flickering in Elena's eyes. When the main course was served, Jonathan sat down his knife and fork, staring at her for a long time. "Elena, do you know all these years I've lived like a machine? Endless schedules, thousands of employees waiting for orders. I was successful, but inside there was only emptiness." He took a deep breath as if tearing away heavy chains. "When the project hit crisis, I thought I would lose everything. My career, my reputation, even the name of Coal Motors. I had braced myself for the empire to collapse until you walked in." Elena let out a bitter laugh. "I walked in looking like a complete wreck. But that's when you saved us." Jonathan cut in, his eyes burning. "Not just the company, you saved me." She froze. Jonathan leaned forward, his voice low. "You were like the first ray of light after the storm. Quiet, unassuming, but you reminded me that life still holds hope, still holds faith. You are brave, brilliant, and full of passion. Elena, you make me want to live, not just exist." Elena's heart trembled. It had been so long since she had heard words spoken from the heart. Not pity, not flattery. "Jonathan, I lost faith a long time ago, after my failed marriage. I didn't think I could trust anyone again. Then try trusting me," he said, reaching across the table to take her hand. "Just once. Let me stay by your side." The music in the restaurant seemed to fade away. Elena stared at the strong hand clasping hers, her heart pounding. "Are you sure about someone like me who once slept on sidewalks? Don't you ever belittle yourself?" Jonathan looked straight into her eyes, his tone firm. "You are the most outstanding engineer I've ever met and the woman who makes me want to break every rule." He stood and walked around the table. To the astonishment of a few nearby guests, Jonathan knelt before Elena, not with a diamond ring but with an earnest gaze. "Elena Carter, I want you not only as my partner, but as my light. Will you give me that chance?" Elena's throat tightened. The chandeliers blurred into a haze of tears. All the wounds and losses seemed to melt away, leaving only warmth. She nodded, whispering, "I'll try to trust again." Jonathan smiled, lowering to press a tender kiss on the back of her hand. It was not only the beginning of a relationship, but the beginning of healing for both their hearts. After the 72-hour demo, Cole Motors plunged into an unprecedented sprint. Elena rewrote Athena's safety framework. Teams of engineers rotated through day and night tests, including wet runways, potholes, crosswinds, and vibrations. Grass that once screamed red gradually smoothed into calming curves. 3 months later, Athena passed independent certifications in both US and Europe with record safety scores. International investors signed additional funding contracts, and the market stopped betting against a collapse. One late winter afternoon, Jonathan himself pressed the Go Live button to deploy Athena across existing models and approve SOP for the next production line. The factory erupted in cheers. Elena leaned against the wall, laughing through tears. She knew they had won the first battle. That evening, on Cole Motors' rooftop, Detroit sparkled beneath their feet. Jonathan spread a simple white cloth, laid out 2 hot dogs beside a bottle of wine, a strange mix of luxury and street food. He said chilly, "I once told you a $5 meal can taste better than a $500 steak. But there's something even better, sharing it with you for the rest of my life." He pulled out a slender titanium ring forged from a leftover crash test frame. Elena laughed through tears. Only a true engineer would propose, not with a diamond, but with a safety module. Tougher, Jonathan winked, and already crash tested. She nodded. "I can correct it." Had once saved a project. That night, it corrected her life's course. That summer, they appeared at the year's biggest auto conference. Jonathan, the composed CEO, Elena, now head of safety engineering, and his wife. Cole's booth was swarmed. Elena was demonstrating to students how to turn errors into early warnings when a voice she knew too well spoke behind her. Elena, Ethan, her ex-husband, gray suit, red tie, the half smile that once broke her heart. No longer arrogant, but still posturing. "I heard you're doing well." His tone dropped. "I am sorry about what happened back then." Elena looked him square in the eyes, calm. "Yes, I'm doing well because I chose to move on. Back then you chose embezzlement, betrayal, and blame. There's nothing left to say." Jonathan walked up, not to shield her, but simply to stand beside her. His presence was enough. Elena turned back to the students, her voice bright as sunlight. "Now let's get to the best part. You don't need perfection to be safe. You just need honesty with the data and solid preparation." Ethan faded out of frame, away from the lenses pointed at the future. No dramatic punishment, only a quiet door to the past closing. 1 year later, the following autumn, Elena held their newborn son, chubby Hake, named Miles. The road, a small gift to all the miles they had traveled and would continue to travel. By night, Miles cried in shifts. By day, Elena worked in the workshop in shifts of her own. Jonathan carried the baby through company hallways, rocking him while reading reports. Employees chuckled at the CEO, doubling as babysitter. Exactly 1 year after his rooftop proposal, Cole Motors launched Aurora, the first car designed from the new safety mindset Athena had pioneered. Streamlined noise filters, triple cross-check validation, soft hands fallback that restored human control in uncertain scenarios, and reflex modeling from calm drivers. At the launch, Jonathan kept it brief. Aurora is not a flashy promise. It's discipline, simplicity in the right places, and the courage of a team willing to correct mistakes. Behind the stage, Elena rattled Miles and whispered, "And it's love." Online pre-orders crashed within 30 minutes. Headlines blared, from "I can correct it" to "We corrected it." Aurora opens a new dawn in driving safety. Universities invited Elena to lecture. She always brought her old cloth bag, "So you'll see dreams can withstand the rain." She laughed, "As long as you don't drop your notebook in a puddle like I once did." One quiet Sunday morning, they left the city in the very first Aurora off the line. Elena drove. Jonathan sat in the passenger seat, Miles snug in his child's seat, hugging a teddy bear half his size. The highway stretched wide, smooth as freshly pressed fabric. The display shone neatly, sensors pulsed like a healthy heart. Soft hands. Jonathan tilted his head, always. Elena rested her hands lightly on the wheel. A soft smile on her lips. A sharp curve appeared. The system suggested slowing. The wheel vibrated gently like a whisper. Elena responded with a delicate touch, as if she were still whispering to life. Calm, steady. The sun rose over the horizon, spilling golden orange across the asphalt. Light filled the cabin, glinting on Elena's lashes. Jonathan silently clasped her hand on the armrest, the grip as steady as his rooftop promise a year ago. Miles coped once, then drifted back to sleep in the morning glow. "Do you remember the first time?" Jonathan asked softly. "When I said we're about to lose everything." Elena tilted her head, smiling. "And I said I can correct it. Turns out we really did." She lowered the window a notch, letting in the scent of fresh grass and waffles from a roadside cafe. Over the hum of tires, she suddenly wanted to say something. Not for the press, not for banners, but only for herself. The man beside her and the baby behind them. "I was once a bigger, but wisdom and faith corrected my whole life." Aurora glided past a sign. "Welcome to the open road." Before them stretched the sunlit highway, the horizon wide open. No more leaky eaves on rainy nights. No more desperate tangled sketches. Just the three of them. a car they had created, and a new sky over the highway where every error had been transformed into safety.